a warm, humid night in July of 2018, 10-year-old Lily Carter vanished from a sleepover in the quiet, tree-lined suburb of Maple Creek. One moment she was in a pink sleeping bag on her best friend's floor, whispering secrets and giggling about a movie they had just watched. The next, she was gone. There was no sign of a struggle, no broken window, no ransom note. The front door was still locked. She had simply been erased from the world, leaving behind only an empty sleeping bag and a profound, terrifying silence that would swallow her family, her friends, and the entire community. The case became a ghost story, a cautionary tale whispered by parents to their children. For 5 long years, the mystery of what happened to Lily Carter remained frozen in time, a wound that refused to heal. The official investigation crumbled into a cold case file, thick with dead-end leads and unanswered questions. Hope, once a roaring fire, dwindled to a barely glowing ember, threatening to be extinguished forever by the relentless passage of time. The world moved on, but for those who loved Lily, time stopped on that summer night. Then, 5 years later, a twist of fate, an act of remembrance in a dusty, sun-drenched bedroom, would lead to a shocking discovery. A single, forgotten object, hidden beneath a loose floorboard, would finally break the silence, unraveling a truth more sinister and heartbreaking than anyone had ever dared to imagine. Lily Carter was a supernova contained in the small frame of a 10-year-old girl. She possessed a boundless energy that seemed to hum just beneath her skin, a current of pure, unadulterated joy. Her laughter wasn't a sound, it was an event, a sudden burst that could fill a room and leave echoes in its corners. She had hair the color of dark honey, and eyes that held the deep, inquisitive brown of a forest floor, always wide with wonder. Lily didn't just look at the world, she interrogated it, her mind a whirlwind of whys and hows. Her primary fascination was the cosmos. While other kids were collecting dolls or trading cards, Lily was collecting facts about nebulae and black holes. Her bedroom wasn't decorated with pop stars, but with glow-in-the-dark star charts and detailed posters of the solar system. Her hero was Carl Sagan. She dreamed of being an astronomer, of one day looking through a powerful telescope and discovering a new star, a celestial body she could name herself. Her family nurtured this passion. Her father, Tom, a gentle-hearted architect, had built her a small, sturdy platform in the backyard for her prized possession, a second-hand telescope she had saved up for a year to buy. He would spend hours with her on clear nights, pointing out constellations and listening to her explain the life cycle of a star, with a seriousness that was both amusing and deeply impressive. Her mother, Sarah, a kindergarten teacher, filled their home with books about space exploration and science. She encouraged Lily's creativity, helping her paint swirling galaxies on canvas and build model rockets out of cardboard tubes and plastic bottles. The Carters were a tight-knit unit of 3, a small, happy solar system with Lily as their bright, blazing sun. At the very center of Lily's personal universe, however, was Chloe Miller. They had been inseparable since they were toddlers, their friendship forged in sandboxes and cemented over years of shared secrets, scraped knees, and sleepovers. Chloe was the quiet observer to Lily's vibrant performer, the calm moon to her fiery sun. Where Lily was outspoken and adventurous, Chloe was thoughtful and cautious. They balanced each other perfectly. Together, they founded the Stargazers Club, an exclusive organization of 2. Their meetings were held in Lily's backyard observatory or Chloe's bedroom, where they would plan imaginary missions to Mars and draw detailed maps of alien worlds. Their immediate goal, the most important mission of their young lives, was to save enough money to one day visit the Kennedy Space Center. They had a shared jar where they deposited their allowance and any money they earned from lemonade stands or helping neighbors with yard work. It was a tangible symbol of their shared future, a future they believed was as certain as the rising of the sun. The life Lily had was rich and full of love. It was a life of purpose, even at 10 years old. She had a family that adored her, a best friend who was her other half, and a passion that gave her direction and filled her with excitement for all the years to come. She was a girl with everything to live for, a bright star with a trajectory aimed at the heavens. The interruption of that life, the sudden and inexplicable extinguishing of her light, was not just a loss. It was a violation against the natural order of things, a black hole opening up in the heart of a family and a friendship, consuming everything in its path. The emotional stakes were immeasurable because the person who was lost was so intensely, vibrantly alive. The final hours of Lily Carter's known existence were bathed in the ordinary magic of a childhood sleepover. It was Friday, July 13, 2018. The air in Maple Creek was thick and heavy, the kind of summer evening where the chirping of crickets felt loud enough to be a conversation. Lily had arrived at Chloe's house just after dinner, her purple backpack bouncing on her shoulders. In it were her pajamas, a toothbrush, and her favorite stuffed animal, a worn-out dog named Comet. Chloe's parents, David and Helen Miller, greeted her with the casual warmth reserved for a child who was practically their own. Helen served them pizza on paper plates in the living room, while they watched an animated movie about talking animals on a grand adventure. Everything was normal. Everything was safe. David Miller, Chloe's father, seemed a bit more subdued than usual. An accountant by trade, he was typically a man of quiet routines and gentle humor. That evening, however, he seemed distracted, his eyes repeatedly glancing at his phone, his smiles not quite reaching his eyes. At one point, he took a call in his home office, closing the door behind him. The girls, engrossed in their movie, paid it little mind. To them, the world of adult worries was a distant, muffled sound, easily ignored. After the movie, the girls retreated to Chloe's upstairs bedroom. It was a cozy space, its walls painted a soft blue, with a single window that overlooked the Millers' manicured backyard and the dark, dense woods that bordered the property. They changed into their pajamas and laid out their sleeping bags on the plush pink rug. For the next hour, they did what 10-year-old best friends do. They traded stickers, read from a book of silly, scary stories by flashlight, and whispered about which boys in their class were cute and which were gross. They talked about their Stargazers Club, planning their next expedition to a nearby hill that they insisted gave them a better view of Jupiter. Around 10:30 p.m., Helen Miller poked her head in to say goodnight. She saw both girls tucked into their sleeping bags, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of a nightlight shaped like the moon. "Don't stay up all night whispering, you two," she said, her voice full of affection. "Lights out in 10 minutes." Lily smiled and waved. "We won't, Mrs. Miller." "Good night," Chloe echoed her. "Good night, Mom." It was the last time Helen, or anyone besides Chloe, would see Lily Carter. The girls continued their conversation in hushed tones for a few more minutes. Chloe would later tell police that their final conversation was about their trip to the Kennedy Space Center. Lily was convinced they would have enough money by the time they were 12. She was describing, in granular detail, what it would feel like to see a real rocket ship up close. As she spoke, she fiddled with a loose floorboard under the edge of Chloe's bed, a secret hiding spot where they stashed their most important treasures: notes, friendship bracelets, and a small, smooth stone Lily had painted to look like the planet Jupiter. It was their secret vault. The events of the next few hours are a black box of speculation and theory. Chloe reported that she fell asleep shortly after 11:00 p.m. to the sound of Lily's soft breathing beside her. She didn't hear a creak on the stairs, a door opening, or a voice in the night. She didn't notice anything amiss. The environment itself presented a deceptive picture of security. The Millers lived on a quiet cul-de-sac. They had a standard lock on the front door and latches on their windows. Yet, a critical vulnerability existed, one no one considered a threat. The window in Chloe's room, though latched, was an older model. A skilled person could potentially jimmy it open from the outside without breaking the glass. It was a seemingly insignificant detail, a minor flaw in an otherwise secure home. But in the architecture of a tragedy, small flaws can become catastrophic points of failure. The only other unusual circumstance was David Miller. He later admitted he couldn't sleep that night, citing work stress. He said he stayed up late in his office poring over spreadsheets. His anxiety, his late-night call, his restlessness, these were threads of foreshadowing, subtle notes of discord in the symphony of a normal suburban night, hinting that the true danger was not from a stranger in the woods, but something far closer to home. The morning of Saturday, July 14th, dawned bright and oppressively sunny, a stark contrast to the darkness that had descended upon the Miller household. At 8:30 a.m., Helen Miller walked up the stairs, a tray with 2 glasses of orange juice and a plate of pancakes in her hands. She was humming, anticipating the sleepy, happy faces of the 2 girls. She pushed open Chloe's bedroom door. "Rise and shine, sleepyheads," she said cheerfully. The words died in her throat. The room was silent. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Her daughter, Chloe, was still fast asleep in her bed, a lump under her comforter. But the pink sleeping bag on the floor was empty. It lay flat and undisturbed, a hollow cocoon. Lily was gone. Helen's first reaction wasn't panic, but mild annoyance. The girls had a history of playing pranks. Hiding was one of their favorite games. "All right, Lily, very funny," she called out, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet house. "Breakfast is ready." She checked the closet, a space cluttered with clothes and board games. No Lily. She knelt and looked under the bed. Just dust bunnies and a stray sock. The initial confusion began to curdle into a knot of unease in her stomach. "Chloe, honey, wake up," she said, gently shaking her daughter's shoulder. "Where's Lily?" Chloe stirred, blinking in the bright light. "What?" she mumbled, her voice thick with sleep. "Where is she?" Helen asked again, her own voice now tighter, higher. Chloe sat up, her eyes scanning the room. She looked at the empty sleeping bag, her brow furrowing. "I don't know." She was right there. The 2 of them searched the room again, then the adjacent bathroom, then the hallway. Each empty space amplified the growing dread. Helen's heart began to hammer against her ribs. She called down to her husband. "David, have you seen Lily?" David came up the stairs, a confused look on his face. "Isn't she in the room?" The 3 of them conducted a frantic, disorganized search of the entire house. The basement, the garage, the backyard. Nothing. It was as if she had dissolved into thin air. The scene itself was deeply unsettling. The front door was still double-bolted from the inside, just as David had locked it the night before. The back door was also secure. The only thing out of place was the window in Chloe's bedroom. The latch was still in the locked position, but the window itself was slightly ajar, open just a crack. It seemed impossible that a 10-year-old could have opened it and climbed out without making a sound, and even more impossible that she could have closed it behind her from the outside. There were no scuff marks on the sill, no footprints in the soft soil of the flower bed below. Panic, cold and sharp, finally broke through Helen's disbelief. She grabbed the phone, her hands shaking so badly she could barely dial. She first called Lily's parents, Sarah and Tom Carter. The conversation was a blur of frantic, choked sentences. "Is Lily there? Did she walk home? Please tell me she's with you." The answer was a terrified no. At 9:12 a.m., Helen Miller dialed 911. Her call, later released to the public, captured the raw terror of that moment. "My daughter's friend is gone," she sobbed to the dispatcher. "She was here for a sleepover. We can't find her anywhere. She's just gone." The dispatcher's calm, professional questions were a surreal counterpoint to Helen's hysteria. "Is the door unlocked, ma'am?" "No, it's locked. Everything is locked. The window is a little open, but she couldn't have—" "Oh God, please." When the first police cruiser pulled up minutes later, they found a scene of domestic chaos frozen by fear. Helen was on the porch, crying uncontrollably. David was pacing the lawn, his face a mask of pale shock. And Chloe was sitting on the stairs, small and silent, clutching a pillow, trying to comprehend how her best friend had been stolen from her side while she slept. The investigation into the disappearance of Lily Carter had begun. The official search for Lily Carter began with a surge of activity that quickly descended into a showcase of confusion, frustration, and catastrophic failure. The Maple Creek Police Department, more accustomed to dealing with minor traffic violations and teenage vandalism, was immediately overwhelmed. The initial officers on the scene made a critical error, allowing the Millers to continue moving through the house, inadvertently contaminating what should have been treated as a potential crime scene from the very first moment. By the time detectives arrived, the integrity of Chloe's bedroom had been compromised. The lead investigator assigned to the case was Detective Frank Holloway, a 25-year veteran of the force who was just 2 years from retirement. He was a man set in his ways, prone to cynicism and quick judgments. From the outset, Holloway operated on the theory that Lily was a runaway. "Kids do this," he told a distraught Tom and Sarah Carter in their living room. "She got scared in the night, decided she wanted her own bed, and slipped out. She's probably hiding at another friend's house, afraid of getting in trouble. His dismissive tone enraged the Carters, who insisted their daughter would never do such a thing. This initial misjudgment set the course for the entire investigation, prioritizing a low-urgency search for a runaway over a high-urgency hunt for a potential abductee. A large-scale ground search was eventually organized, but it didn't begin in earnest until late Saturday afternoon, precious hours after Lily had been reported missing. Hundreds of volunteers from Maple Creek and neighboring towns descended on the area, a testament to the community's heart, but their efforts were poorly coordinated. They combed the dense woods behind the Miller house, a sprawling expanse of state forest. The search teams were a mix of trained first responders and well-meaning, but inexperienced civilians. They shouted Lily's name until their voices were hoarse, their bright orange vests dots of color against the deep green and brown of the forest. Their search was almost immediately hampered by a cruel twist of fate. That evening, the humid summer air finally broke. A violent thunderstorm rolled in, unleashing a torrential downpour that lasted for hours. The rain turned the forest floor into a muddy quagmire, obliterating any potential tracks or scents for the K9 units to follow. It washed away any trace of Lily that might have been left in the woods, effectively erasing the slate. The search became an external conflict against nature itself. The police interviews were equally fruitless. They questioned Chloe repeatedly, but the 10-year-old was traumatized and could offer no new information. She slept through the entire event. They questioned her parents, David and Helen. David's quiet anxiety was noted, but it was attributed to the stress of the situation. Holloway's team focused heavily on Lily's parents, Tom and Sarah, grilling them about marital problems or financial troubles, searching for a domestic motive that didn't exist. The family's frustration grew into a palpable desperation. They felt they were being treated as suspects, not as victims. They pleaded with the police to consider the possibility of abduction, to look at the slightly open window not as an exit route for a runaway girl, but as a possible point of entry for an intruder. Their pleas fell on deaf ears. Holloway remained fixated on his runaway theory. The most tragic failure of the official search occurred on the third day. A state police helicopter, brought in to conduct an aerial survey of the vast woodland, experienced a mechanical failure. The pilot attempted an emergency landing in a small clearing, but the aircraft clipped a tall pine tree and crashed, bursting into flames. The pilot and a state trooper on board were killed instantly. The tragedy sent a shockwave through the already reeling community. The search for Lily was immediately suspended for 24 hours, as resources were diverted to the crash site. The incident cast a dark pall over the entire operation, a symbol of its doomed nature. When the search resumed, the momentum was gone. The number of volunteers dwindled. The media, which had swarmed the town, now had a new, more dramatic story to focus on. After 10 days of fruitless searching, the active ground search was officially called off. The police department announced they would continue to follow up on leads, but the massive, coordinated effort was over. The investigation had failed. It failed due to bureaucratic incompetence, a lead detective's stubborn tunnel vision, a tragic accident, and a merciless summer storm. The search for Lily Carter had not only failed to find her, but it had also cost 2 more lives, leaving her family with nothing but an empty bedroom and a crushing sense of abandonment. The years that followed the failed search were long and silent. The case of Lily Carter went cold, transitioning from a frantic headline to a dusty file in a cabinet at the Maple Creek Police Department. For the world outside the small town, the story faded, just another sad tale in a sea of them. But for those left behind, the mystery became a constant, suffocating presence, a ghost that haunted their every waking moment. The passage of time did not heal the wound. It only deepened it, turning sharp grief into a chronic, aching sorrow. Lily's parents, Tom and Sarah, became specters of their former selves. The vibrant, loving home they had built crumbled into a quiet, sterile museum of their daughter's life. Lily's bedroom was kept exactly as she had left it, the star charts on the wall, the model rockets on her desk, the telescope still pointing towards the sky from its platform in the backyard. But now, a thick layer of dust settled on everything, a physical manifestation of their frozen grief. Tom, Once a man of gentle strength, grew gaunt and hollow-eyed. He stopped taking on new architectural projects, unable to find the focus or the will. Sarah quit her job as a kindergarten teacher, the sound of children's laughter becoming an unbearable reminder of the one voice she would never hear again. They became recluses, their shared sorrow a fortress that kept the rest of the world out. The community of Maple Creek was also profoundly changed. The illusion of safety that had once defined their suburban existence was shattered forever. Parents held their children closer, a new, unspoken fear dictating curfews and rules. The Miller house on the quiet cul-de-sac became a grim landmark, a place people drove by slowly, their gazes lingering on the upstairs window of Chloe's bedroom. In local folklore, Lily became a tragic figure, the Starlight Ghost, a story told to scare children into staying close to home. The name was a cruel twisting of her passion, turning her love for the cosmos into a haunting epithet. For Chloe Miller, the cold years were a prison of guilt and isolation. As she grew from a child into a teenager, the memory of that night was a shadow that followed her relentlessly. She was the girl whose best friend vanished from her side. At school, she was met with a mixture of pity and suspicion. Whispers followed her down the hallways. Some kids were cruel, accusing her of knowing more than she let on. Others simply avoided her, as if her proximity to tragedy was contagious. Her friendship with Lily, once the brightest part of her life, was now the source of her deepest pain. She rarely spoke of Lily, but she thought of her constantly. Every starry night was a painful reminder of their Stargazers Club. Every mention of space travel felt like a personal blow. She carried a heavy, unshakable guilt, wondering if she could have done something differently. What if she hadn't fallen asleep? What if she had heard a noise? The what-ifs were a relentless torture. The Miller family unit itself was fractured by the secret it unknowingly harbored. Helen Miller threw herself into a frantic routine of cleaning and organizing, a desperate attempt to maintain control in a life that had spun out of it. David Miller became even more withdrawn, a man buried under the weight of a truth he was too terrified to speak. His quietness was misinterpreted as grief, but it was the heavier burden of complicity. The years passed, turning the 1-year anniversary into the 2-year, then the 3, the 4. The police department had a new detective in charge of cold cases, but Lily's file remained at the bottom of the pile. There were no new leads, no new evidence. The mystery of her disappearance was a solid, impenetrable wall. Hope had all but vanished, replaced by a grim, weary acceptance. Lily Carter was gone, and no one knew how or why. The silence was absolute. For 5 years, the case of Lily Carter was a closed book, a story with no final chapter. The catalyst that finally reopened it came not from a police initiative or a new piece of forensic technology, but from a place of deep-seated sorrow and the mundane act of moving on. The Miller family had finally decided to sell their house. The property on the quiet cul-de-sac was no longer a home. It was a memorial to a tragedy, its walls saturated with painful memories. Helen believed a new start was the only way their fractured family could begin to heal. David, burdened by his own dark secrets tied to the house, readily agreed. In late August of 2023, just weeks after the 5th anniversary of Lily's disappearance, they began the arduous process of packing up their lives. Chloe, now a reserved and introspective 15-year-old, was tasked with clearing out her childhood bedroom. The room had been redecorated years ago. The soft blue walls were now a neutral beige, the pink rug replaced with hardwood, but the ghost of the past remained. As she sorted through old books and clothes, she was hit by waves of nostalgia, a bittersweet ache for a time of innocence that felt a lifetime away. She packed boxes with a detached efficiency until she reached her bed. Kneeling on the floor, she ran her hand over the polished wood where her pink rug used to be, and then she remembered the loose floorboard, their secret vault, a place she hadn't thought about in years. It was a silly childhood secret, a place for notes and trinkets. A part of her wanted to leave it, to pack the final box and close the door on this room forever. But another part, a sudden, insistent curiosity, compelled her to look. She needed a tool to pry it up. She went to the garage and returned with a flathead screwdriver. With some effort, the board groaned and came loose in her hands. She peered into the dark, dusty space beneath. At first, all she saw were the familiar artifacts of her friendship with Lily. There were several folded, faded notes passed in class. There were 2 intertwined friendship bracelets, one blue and one purple. There was the small, smooth stone Lily had painted to look like Jupiter, its colors still surprisingly vibrant. A sad smile touched Chloe's lips. She reached in to gather the items, a final memento of her lost friend. As her fingers brushed against the dusty bottom of the cavity, they hit something small, hard, and metallic. It didn't belong. It wasn't a stone or a piece of plastic jewelry. Her heart gave a strange, sharp thump. Carefully, she fished it out and brought it into the light. It was a cufflink. It was heavy, made of ornate, polished silver. In its center was an elegant, swirling monogram, the letter T. Chloe stared at it, her mind racing. This was not hers. It was certainly not Lily's. It was an adult's object, expensive and formal. It had no place among their childhood treasures. How did it get here? She tried to remember the last time she and Lily had used the hiding spot. It was that night. She remembered Lily fiddling with the floorboard as they talked. Had Lily found it and put it there? Or had she hidden it there for a reason? The cufflink felt cold and heavy in her palm, a piece of alien technology from a world she didn't understand. The significance of the discovery began to dawn on her, slowly at first, then with the force of a tidal wave. For 5 years, the narrative had been fixed. Lily vanished without a trace from a sealed room. But this object was a trace. It was a tangible piece of evidence from that night, overlooked by everyone. It was a clue that had been sitting under her bed, waiting in silence for 5 long years. This wasn't just a piece of forgotten jewelry. It was a key. Chloe's hand closed tightly around it, the metallic edges digging into her skin. The long, silent winter of the cold case was about to end. Chloe sat on her bedroom floor for nearly an hour, the silver cufflink clutched in her hand. Her mind was a maelstrom of fear and a fragile, terrifying hope. This object changed everything. It was a voice from the past, a silent witness that had been waiting to speak. The fear told her to put it back, to close the floorboard and forget she ever saw it. But the hope, a feeling she hadn't truly felt in 5 years, was stronger. It was a hope for answers, for justice for Lily. She knew she couldn't go to her parents. A deep, unsettling instinct told her this was connected to the secrets that had made her father so withdrawn and her mother so brittle. She also couldn't go to the Maple Creek police. They had dismissed the case years ago. She needed a fresh start. Recalling a local news story about a new detective who was re-examining cold cases in the county, she found the name online, Detective Isabella Rossi. The next day, bypassing her parents and local authorities, Chloe took a bus to the county sheriff's department. She walked in, a nervous 15-year-old, and asked to speak with Detective Rossi. Rossi, a sharp, energetic woman in her late 30s with a reputation for tenacity, was intrigued by the girl's insistence. In a small, sterile interview room, Chloe placed the cufflink on the table between them. She recounted the story of the sleepover, the loose floorboard, and her discovery. Rossi listened intently, her expression shifting from professional curiosity to intense focus. Unlike Detective Holloway 5 years prior, Rossi didn't dismiss it. She saw the cufflink for what it was, the first new piece of physical evidence in half a decade. She immediately sent it to the state forensic lab for priority analysis. While they waited for the results, Rossi pulled the original case file on Lily Carter. She read through the witness statements, the timelines, the reports on the failed search. She noted David Miller's quiet anxiety and the oddity of the latched but open window. The old theory of a runaway seemed flimsy, a convenient explanation for a baffling crime. The lab results came back within 48 hours. The cufflink itself yielded no usable fingerprints, having been wiped clean or handled too much over the years. But deep within the intricate silverwork, the lab found a microscopic fiber. It was a single dark blue thread, composed of a rare and expensive blend of cashmere and silk, the kind used in high-end bespoke suits. More importantly, the jewelers who had received Rossi's query about the design responded. The T monogram cufflink was part of a custom set made exclusively for one client 3 years before Lily's disappearance, Marcus Thorne. The name hit Rossi like a physical blow. Marcus Thorne was one of the most powerful and respected men in the region. A wealthy real estate developer, philanthropist, and political donor, He was considered untouchable. His public image was flawless. Rossi knew that accusing a man like Thorne required more than a single fiber and a cufflink found by a teenager. She started digging, quietly and meticulously, into Thorne's world. She ran financial background checks, looking for any connection, no matter how tenuous, to the Miller family. It took a week of scouring shell corporations and obscure financial records, but she found it. A series of structured payments from a holding company owned by Thorne to a small, independent accounting firm. The sole proprietor of that firm was David Miller. The pieces began to click into place with terrifying speed. David Miller wasn't just a suburban accountant. He was working for Marcus Thorne. The payments looked suspiciously like a method for laundering money. Rossi now had a motive for a connection, a reason why a man like Thorne might have been at or near the Miller house. She realized she had to tread carefully. If Thorne got wind of her investigation, he could use his influence to shut it down. She needed leverage. She needed the one person who was there that night, David Miller. Rossi decided on a direct confrontation. She drove to the Miller house where David was loading boxes into a moving van. She approached him alone, showing him the cufflink in a small evidence bag. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice calm but firm. "We need to talk about the night Lily Carter disappeared. We need to talk about Marcus Thorne." The color drained from David's face. His body seemed to shrink, the facade of a normal suburban father crumbling in an instant. He stared at the cufflink, his eyes wide with a terror that had been simmering for 5 years. He started to stammer, to deny everything. But Rossi pressed, laying out the evidence. The financial records, the fiber, the cufflink itself. She spoke of the possibility of a reduced sentence for cooperation, of finally ending the nightmare for the Carter family, and for his own. The weight of his secret, a burden he had carried in suffocating silence, became too much to bear. David Miller broke. In a flood of tears and choked confessions, standing in his driveway, he told Detective Rossi everything. He had gotten into debt, and Thorne had offered him a way out, roping him into his money laundering scheme. The night of the sleepover, Thorne had demanded to use David's unassuming house for a high-stakes, secret meeting with a rival criminal faction. Thorne and 2 of his men had arrived late, after the girls were supposedly asleep. But Lily, a light sleeper, had woken up to get a glass of water. She had walked down the hall and seen them in the living room. Thorne, his associates, and the rivals. She had seen their faces. Before David could react, one of Thorne's men had snatched her, clapping a hand over her mouth. They took her to ensure her silence and, more importantly, to ensure David's. They threatened to harm Chloe and Helen if he ever spoke a word. He watched them carry Lily out of his house, a silent, terrified accomplice to the abduction of his daughter's best friend. He never saw her again. Armed with David Miller's full confession, Rossi now had what she needed. She immediately secured a warrant for Thorne's arrest and organized a multi-agency task force. As SWAT teams descended on Thorne's mansion and corporate offices, Thorne, tipped off by a contact inside the local police, made a desperate run for it. A high-speed chase ensued on the interstate, ending when police forced his car off the road. Cornered and defeated, Marcus Thorne was taken into custody. In the interrogation room, faced with David Miller's testimony, he remained arrogant and silent, but his henchmen were not so loyal. Rossi's team arrested the 2 men David had identified from that night. One of them, a career criminal named Vincent Gallo, cracked under the pressure. In exchange for a deal, he confessed to the entire crime, including the final, heartbreaking detail. He told them what they had done with Lily. He told them where she was buried. The revelation of Marcus Thorne's involvement sent a seismic shockwave through Maple Creek and the entire region. The man they had known as a civic leader and philanthropist was unmasked as a ruthless criminal who had orchestrated the abduction and murder of a 10-year-old child. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of legal and investigative activity as the full scope of Thorne's conspiracy was laid bare for a horrified public. With the confession from his henchman Vincent Gallo, the why behind Lily's disappearance was finally, brutally explained. The meeting at David Miller's house was not just a business transaction. It was a tense negotiation between Thorne's operation and a rival gang from the city over disputed territory for a drug trafficking route. Thorne chose David's house precisely because it was so ordinary. so far off the radar of both law enforcement and his enemies. It was meant to be a neutral, invisible location. David Miller's role was one of a terrified pawn. He had started by cooking the books for Thorne's legitimate real estate business, but had been gradually pulled deeper into the criminal enterprise. By the time he realized the true nature of Thorne's activities, he was trapped by threats and blackmail. His confession detailed a life lived in constant fear, culminating in the horror of that night. According to Gallo's statement, Lily waking up was a catastrophic, unplanned event. When she appeared in the hallway, her eyes wide with sleep and confusion, she saw the faces of Thorne, his men, and the members of the rival gang. In that one moment, she became a fatal liability to everyone in the room. Gallo admitted that Thorne made the decision instantly. There was no debate. The girl had to be silenced. They took her from the house, leaving a terrified David Miller with a chilling ultimatum. If he spoke, his own daughter, Chloe, would be next. They drove for over an hour to a remote, undeveloped piece of land that Thorne's company had recently purchased for a future commercial park. It was there, in the cold, dark woods, that Marcus Thorne himself ended Lily's life. It was a cold, calculated act to protect his empire and maintain his leverage over David Miller. For 5 years, he had used the unsolved disappearance as an implicit threat, ensuring David's continued silence and cooperation. The arrest of Marcus Thorne was only the beginning. The information gleaned from David Miller's confession and Gallo's subsequent statements allowed investigators to dismantle Thorne's entire criminal network. Warrants were executed across the state, leading to over a dozen arrests of associates, rival gang members who were at the meeting, and even a corrupt local official Thorne had on his payroll. The case expanded from a single child abduction to a massive racketeering and conspiracy investigation. David Miller was arrested and charged with accessory to kidnapping and obstruction of justice. His cooperation, however, was his only saving grace. The district attorney, recognizing that he was also a victim of Thorne's manipulation and threats, offered him a plea bargain. He would serve a reduced sentence in exchange for his full and truthful testimony against Thorne and all other parties. The news of David's involvement was a second devastating blow to the community, and especially to his own family. Helen and Chloe were forced to confront the terrible truth that the man they loved had been complicit, through fear, in the tragedy that had defined their lives. For the Carter family, the revelations were a complex mix of agony and vindication. The confirmation of Lily's murder was the ultimate nightmare realized, but at the same time, the unmasking of her killer provided an answer to the gnawing question of why that had tormented them for years. Their fight for justice, which had felt so hopeless, was finally validated. The monster wasn't a faceless stranger or a phantom in the woods. He was a man with a name and a face, a man who had smiled at them at charity events, a pillar of the community who was, in reality, a predator hiding in plain sight. The resolution of the case brought the narrative back from the cold, hard facts of the investigation to the raw, human core of the tragedy. The legal proceedings and headlines faded into the background, replaced by the quiet, painful process of finding closure. Following Vincent Gallo's directions, a team of forensic anthropologists and investigators converged on the desolate construction site owned by Thorne's company. After hours of careful excavation under the shade of a large oak tree, they found what they were looking for. The recovery of Lily Carter's remains was a somber, silent affair. For her parents, Tom and Sarah, the official identification was a moment of profound and gut-wrenching finality. The last, desperate flicker of irrational hope that she might somehow be alive was extinguished forever. Yet mixed with the overwhelming grief was a strange and profound sense of relief. The not knowing, the endless, agonizing limbo, was over. They could finally bring their daughter home. The funeral for Lily Carter was held 2 weeks later. The entire town of Maple Creek seemed to attend, filling the small church to overflowing and spilling out onto the lawn. It was a community trying to atone for its 5 years of quiet forgetting, a collective expression of sorrow for the little girl who loved the stars. Chloe Miller attended with her mother, Helen. She sat in a back pew, a silent observer of the grief she felt so deeply connected to. After the service, Sarah Carter approached her. Chloe braced herself for anger, for blame. Instead, Sarah wrapped her in a tight, desperate hug. "It wasn't your fault, Chloe," she whispered, her voice choked with tears. "None of it was your fault." In that moment of grace, a small piece of the crushing guilt Chloe had carried for years began to lift. It was a moment of shared sorrow that transcended blame, a connection forged in the crucible of a shared loss. The human element of the story also played out in the sterile visiting room of the county jail. Chloe and Helen went to see David. He was a broken man, gaunt and aged beyond his years. The conversation was strained, full of long, painful silences. There was anger, yes, but there was also a dawning, complex understanding of the impossible situation he had been in. Chloe looked at her father, the man who had taught her to ride a bike and helped her with her homework, and saw not a monster, but a weak man who had made a series of terrible choices out of fear. "I was so scared," he wept, his voice muffled by the visitor's phone. "I was so scared for you." Forgiveness was not yet possible, but the visit was the first, tentative step toward rebuilding a family that had been shattered by a secret. For Chloe, the resolution was not a happy ending. The discovery of the truth had brought justice, but it had also stolen the last remnants of her childhood innocence. Her home was a crime scene. Her father was a felon. Her best friend was dead. But in solving the mystery, she had fulfilled a final, unspoken promise to Lily. She had given her a voice when she had none. She had brought her home from the darkness. The relief of knowing was inextricably mixed with the pain of what she now knew, a heavy burden she would carry for the rest of her life. It was the complex, heartbreaking peace that comes not with victory, but with the end of a long and terrible war. The legacy of Lily Carter's case extended far beyond the courtroom and the grieving families. Her story became a permanent part of the fabric of Maple Creek, a cautionary tale that fundamentally altered the community's perception of itself. The idyllic image of a safe suburban haven was replaced by a more sober understanding that darkness can exist anywhere, even behind the locked doors of a quiet home on a peaceful cul-de-sac. The tragedy served as a catalyst for tangible change. Galvanized by the initial investigative failures and Detective Holloway's misguided runaway theory, Sarah and Tom Carter, with the help of Detective Rossi, channeled their grief into advocacy. They campaigned tirelessly for a change in state law regarding missing children. A year after Thorne's conviction, the governor signed the Lily Carter Law. This new legislation mandated that any report of a missing child under the age of 13 be immediately classified as a high-risk abduction case, triggering a rapid, multi-agency response protocol. It eliminated the discretionary waiting period and the initial assumption of a runaway, ensuring that the mistakes made in the first hours of Lily's disappearance would not be repeated. The case became a standard training module for law enforcement academies across the state, a textbook example of the devastating consequences of confirmation bias and the critical importance of treating every missing child case with the utmost urgency. Thematically, Lily's story became a powerful reflection on the duality of human nature. Marcus Thorne embodied a profound and chilling evil, a man so consumed by greed and power that he could extinguish a child's life without a second thought, all while wearing the mask of a community benefactor. His story was a stark reminder of the corrupting influence of power and the sociopathic narcissism that can hide behind a veneer of respectability. In contrast, the story also highlighted an incredible, enduring compassion. It was seen in the quiet strength of Chloe, whose love for her friend spurred her to seek the truth. It was seen in the grace of Sarah Carter, who chose empathy over blame. And it was seen in the tenacity of Detective Rossi, who believed a 15-year-old girl, and in doing so, brought a monster to justice. The central lesson of the narrative became the immense power of a single, small detail. For 5 years, the truth lay hidden, not in a remote forest or a hidden grave, but in a dusty space beneath a floorboard. It was a testament to the idea that no secret is ever truly safe, and that justice can sometimes hinge on the most insignificant of objects. A forgotten cufflink, a childhood hiding spot, a friend's enduring memory. The legacy of Lily Carter was one of tragedy, but also of change. A solemn promise to do better, written in law and seared into the conscience of a community that would never forget the little girl who loved the stars. A single silver cufflink, hidden by a child in an act of fear or instinct, became the key that unlocked a 5-year-old secret, proving that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, will always fight its way to the surface. The story of Lily Carter is a heartbreaking reminder that the most devastating mysteries often begin in the places we feel safest, and that the greatest evils can be perpetrated by the people we are taught to admire. If this story of a friendship that persisted beyond tragedy and a truth that refused to stay buried resonated with you, please show your support by liking this video, sharing it with others, and subscribing to our channel for more true crime mysteries that uncover the stories that need to be told. The justice system delivered its verdict on the people involved, but the moral questions remain complex. We want to know what you think. Tell us in the comments below. Do you believe David Miller's fear for his own family justified his 5 years of silence? Did he deserve the lighter sentence he received for his cooperation? Let's discuss it.